Meeting is made possible by our 2021 presenting supporter, Boulder County. I would also like to thank our gold sponsors for 2021, Colorado High Performance Transportation Enterprise, Elevations Credit Union, the Northwest Chamber Alliance, Google, and the RTD. The rest of our 2021 sponsors were included in the slideshow at the beginning of the event. We are so grateful for your generous support of our organization this year. If this is your first time attending a membership meeting, we want to welcome you. And we also want to let you know that Commuting Solutions is a nonprofit membership organization that we serve as the transportation management organization for this Northwest Metro region. And it's a role that we have proudly served for over 23 years to convene public-private sectors, the nonprofit stakeholders to advocate for multimodal transportation needs in our region. Please contact me if you would like information for how you can support Commuting Solutions as an individual or as a company through membership. And if your organization is already a member, thanks for your support. We are also a proud member of the Denver Regional Council of Governments Way to Go Regional TDM program, working with 7 other TMOs and DRCOG in this metro region to reduce traffic congestion and improve our air quality throughout the Denver region. Again, thank you for joining us here today. Let's get started with our program. So our first action today is to take action on the 2021 board officers and 2022 to 2023 board members. So I am pleased to welcome Chris McShane. He's chair of our governance committee and a senior vice president with InBank to carry out the annual meeting to appoint our officers and new board members. So welcome, Chris. I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here today for our annual meeting and for this membership meeting. As Audrey alluded to, this is the business function of the annual meeting. We need to elect our board officers and board of directors for the coming year. And so on your screen, you can see listed for you are the proposed officers for the coming year. We have Craig Eicher as chair, Erica Vandenbrand as vice chair, and Craig Eicher from Excel Energy. We have Erica Vandenbrand as the vice chairperson for the city of Boulder. We have Rob Zaccaro from the city of Louisville as our past chair. Myself, Chris McShane, as the treasurer from InBank, and Sarah Grant from the city and county of Broomfield as secretary. And then for the remaining at-large members, we have Kathleen Brackey from Boulder County as an at-large member. Kirsten Schuchman from the University of Colorado Boulder as an at-large member. Audrey DeBarros is an at-large board member and a non-voting member of the board. And let's see, next slide is going to be the next slide should be Jordan Swisher from Brew Buckall as an at-large member. Julie Pillar from Sister Carmen Community Center in Lafayette as an at-large member. Julie Issam from Vista Adventist Hospital as an at-large member. Bill Greenwald from the city of Longmont as an at-large member. And from Google as an at-large member. And so that is the proposed slate of directors for the year, listed officers first, and we need to vote on both, I believe. So, we're going to, rather than do voice vote, which could introduce a lot of mayhem with Zoom, we're going to use the chat function for nomination or for taking the motions, and then we're going to ask you, those of you who are members of the organization and are planning to vote on these measures to use the reaction buttons down in your lower middle section there. So I'll read again I'll take a motion for the proposals, and then we'll ask for a second, and then we'll call for the vote. And please use the reaction thumbs up in order to, yeah. And I do see that we have a move from Frank Bruno to motion. We have a second from Kathleen Brackey. This is for the officers and the slate of directors. And if you would all indicate, we'll take all yay votes. If you could indicate with a raised hand or a thumbs up. And if there are any thumbs down, or please indicate so. Okay. And with that, thanks, we did record this, so it looks like the motion passed based on the number of indications in the reactions. So thank you all for voting and for approving the directors and officers for the coming year. And with that, I will kick it back over to Audrey.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you everyone for engaging and supporting the approval of our leadership for the coming year. I wanted to just take a moment to thank Rob Zucchero with the City of Louisville, who has been serving as our board chairperson for 2021. We greatly appreciate his leadership and his strong stewardship of commuting solutions as chairperson this year. So thank you, Rob, for your service. All right, well, next on the agenda, we are pleased to welcome and have with us RTD General Manager, Ms. Brt Johnson, and District O Director, Lynn Geisinger. It's been a year since Ms. Johnson joined the RTD, and we welcomed her at that time at a membership meeting. So we're pleased to have you back. And, you know, a lot has happened with the RTD. And so we're really pleased to have Deborah with us. RTD is an incredibly important partner to our region, and as well as other transit service providers in this area, such as our very own Via Mobility Services, who are seeking to recover from the impacts of COVID to move people through all of the challenges of COVID-19 and beyond. So please join me to welcome Director Geisinger and Ms. Brt Johnson. Thank you.
Good morning. I think, can you hear me now okay?
Yes, we can. Welcome,
Great.
Lynn.
Thank you. Thank you. I think I'm kicking this off just very briefly because I know that our General Manager and CEO, Brt Johnson, has a great slideshow. I wanted to start by saying that on this Colorado Gives Day, I am mindful of the great work that's being done by Commuting Solutions for transit and multimodal options in our area, and thanking Audrey and her staff and the board for all their good work. I just have a couple of quick things about what's going on with the board, and then also two things that I think are of particular interest to this area. The board has been busy. Deborah will be covering a lot of what we've been doing, the strategic planning and budget and a lot of things. It's been a wild year, of course. Right now we're working on redistricting, just like everybody else has after the census. Each director on the board, the 15 of us, represents about 205,000 people. And there will be some moving around, but I believe this area will stay reasonably intact. There'll be a few changes. Another thing we're working on is we're looking tonight at changing our structure in terms of committees. We've been meeting for the last few years as committees of the whole, and we'll be going to smaller committees with the goal of being able to have more in-depth discussion of various items and have people really focus on their particular topic of interest. In terms of a couple of additional items that I wanted to mention, one is that in the MTFP, the midterm financial plan, the board kept intact the planning for the funding for the Highway 119 project. I believe it's $33 million that is scheduled in 2023. And Commuting Solutions has been instrumental in asking for $5 million earlier to start the design process, and that is in the budget for 2022, the $5 million. And I'm told that the staff is already working with CDOT to move that forward. And just one final thing, the legislature is looking, there's an interim committee that has looked at the credit for passes, eco passes and similar bus passes. It's been a very small tax credit for those in for C Corps currently that has not been heavily used, but they're looking and apparently are passed out of the interim committee a much larger tax credit that would apply to all businesses, which is great news. That businesses could buy eco passes and get a large tax credit for that. So stay tuned, more on that coming. I will just also say that I'm very grateful for our new and very strong and talented CEO, General Manager, Brt Johnson. She's had a wild year that keeps continuing, but she's been doing a great job leading the board and the agency and cleaning up many things and addressing many problems. So thanks, I'll turn it over to her now.
So good morning to all of you, and thank you so much for that introduction, Director Geisinger. I want to extend my gratitude and thanks for the opportunity to be with you this morning, to Executive Director DeBarros and members of the board, and to all that are virtually assembled. It's my pleasure to bring to you a snapshot of RTD and what we have before us. A quick question for me, do you all have my presentation? If so, will somebody be advancing that?
Yes, Angela from our team will just advance the slides for you. So if you could just indicate next slide, then she'll know your timing.
Sure thing, thank you very kindly. So if we could bring up the presentation, that'll be greatly appreciated. So thank you very much. Once again, as I said, I am Brt Johnson, as introduced, the General Manager and CEO, and I am here to provide a brief presentation and more or less provide a transit snapshot for all of you this morning. If I could go to the next slide, please. So what I'll be doing this morning in relationship to this snapshot is sharing with you information pertaining to the agency's strategic planning efforts in order to provide a glimpse of transit in the Denver metro region in the midterm planning horizon. Further, I will touch upon the impacts of rescue and relief funding derived from recent federal legislation, as well as some of the forward-looking initiatives currently underway at the agency. And then I will entertain questions at the conclusion of my presentation if time allows. Next slide, please. So, as you heard from Director Geisinger in reference to our strategic planning efforts, I am going to begin today with an overview of RTD's 2021-2026 strategic plan, which is the agency's roadmap to organizational excellence. The plan is both ambitious and actionable, because no strategic plan should be an easy approach. As I often say, no one cannot spell challenge without change. The plan will serve as the guiding vision for strategic success. And I truly believe this plan will elevate RTD to new heights through a focused pursuit of excellence. Next slide. So when I started here at the agency back in November of 2020, I immediately began implementing my initial 120-day plan, which included listening and learning and gaining an understanding of what it is I did not know about RTD, such as its culture, business processes, and inner workings. One of the many areas of opportunity that I discovered is that there's not a clear alignment, or there was not a clear alignment around strategic priorities and success outcomes for the organization. There must be clear actions to produce those outcomes, the right organizational structure in place to execute, as well as talented people in those roles, and prioritize tracking metrics to monitor progress. The blueprint for success involves the why, the what, the how, and the who, and it translates to outcomes driving organizational focus. Our strategic planning document now serves as the functional pillars to plan, develop, evaluate, and measure RTD's overall performance. Next slide, please. So the question is, what does RTD's strategic plan aim to accomplish? Well, first, it provides clear measurable, and prioritized success outcomes that RTD is focused to deliver for the community and its customers. Secondly, it provides an action-driven business plan with milestones, budget, and internal executive owners to produce said outcomes. And thirdly, it will provide a transparent performance scorecard that I, along with the members of the executive team, are committed to producing quarterly to share with all public stakeholders as to how the agency is proceeding to deliver those outcomes. Next slide. In developing the strategic plan, RTD reevaluated its core identity and service delivery principles. And in doing so, established a new mission, vision, and value statements for the entire organization. Many of you have heard me say in various forums that I firmly believe that public transportation is the great societal equalizer, unleashing people from their limitations and providing access to opportunities by providing a means of transport. That is why we, as the people in the people business here at RTD, firmly believe that we make lives better through connections. In my listening sessions, I heard from a wide range of voices that there was not an abundance of trust with RTD. A vision, as defined, is an inspirational as well as an aspirational statement of an idealistic, emotional future of an organization. That is why we at RTD are collectively aspiring to be the trusted leader in mobility, delivering excellence and value to RTD's customers and community. The organizational values, which are ideals and beliefs, RTD collectively holds to be true and will aid in developing an intentional culture. These include passion. We will be purposeful in delivering our work. Respect. We will demonstrate respect and integrity in our interactions in both our colleagues and our community members. Diversity. We will honor diversity in thought, people, and experience, being receptive to unique ideas and viewpoints to achieve optimal results in problem solving. Trustworthiness. We will be forthright in our actions, and we will do what we say when we say we will do it. Collaboration. We will approach our work in a collaborative manner, seeking and acknowledging valued input from our colleagues and the community. And then rounding out with ownership. We will commit ourselves to continuous learning and do what it takes to deliver our shared vision. Next slide, please. So the what is what the agency strives to achieve as embodied by these 4 strategic priorities that were developed collectively with our board as well as with employees, and will serve as the functional pillars to plan, develop, and evaluate and measure RTD's overall performance. So when we look at that first box, the gold color, community value, that speaks to RTD strives to be a community partner, providing value to our customers as well as to the broader Denver metro region while sustaining planet Earth. I would note that community value is the first among the strategic priorities, and for good reason. RTD has redoubled its efforts to be seen as adding substantial value to the communities it serves, as gauged by surveys created in collaboration with a number of external stakeholders. I would also reiterate here that RTD shares the region's passion for environmental stewardship and is committed to its role in providing options for individuals and employers to reduce their carbon footprints. Customer excellence, which is in the blue box to the right, RTD strives to consistently deliver high quality service. Simply put, RTD cannot exist without its customers. Employee ownership there in green. RTD seeks to attract and retain a highly skilled and engaged workforce. Really and truly, we're striving to be an employer of choice in the Denver metro region and to employ talented, courageous, agile, committed, and creative employees to guide the agency toward a successful future. And then last but certainly not least is financial success. RTD takes very seriously the management of all financial resources. As a public entity created by the legislature, RTD is committed to being a good steward of public dollars. Next slide, please. So as we looked at all this, relating to our strategic plan and the comments that I've just made as it relates to surveying and trying to strive to achieve those priorities, for those who may be unfamiliar, I want to briefly touch upon the Net Promoter Score, or NPS, as which it's commonly referred, which measures customer experience. It assesses loyalty and word of mouth favorability among customers and allows for performance comparisons between organizations across different business sectors. NPS, as you can see on this slide, there's a mathematical equation at the bottom, is a measurement of promoters, meaning those rating a business at a 9 or a 10 in a customer survey, which indicates that those individuals are likely to recommend the business to a friend or a neighbor, minus detractors. And those are individuals who would rate a business anywhere between a 0 to a 6. Those customers giving a 7 or 8 rating are not passionate either way about the business in question and are not factored into the score. So to summarize, this is how we're going to determine what value we are bringing to our customer base, our ridership base, and use that as the litmus test as we strive to provide customer excellence. Going on to the next slide, please. I will now turn to the impacts of federal funding derived from legislation intended to address pandemic-related shortfalls. Next slide, please. So there's been a lot of talk about the American Rescue Plan Act that was signed into law in March 2021. And the transit-related funded included in the American Rescue Plan, or ARPA as we call it, is intended to support transit agencies experiencing pandemic-related shortfalls. Now, RTD was apportioned funding in March of this year due to existing funding apportionments from earlier rescue and relief legislation. The agency has not drawn on any of the ARPA funds to date. Reimbursable expenditures under ARPA are those that are incurred for maintaining service, including compensation for transit employees, fuel, and purchase transportation. Funding is specifically available for payroll for public transit providers unless the recipient entity certifies it has not furloughed any employees, operating costs, including the cost of personal protective equipment and administrative leave due to service reductions. Next slide, please. Recognizing that ARPA awarded funding must be obligated by September 30th, 2024 and dispersed by September 30th, 2029. Any grant application that is submitted to the Federal Transit Administration must explain how funds are to be distributed and which projects will receive funding. The FTA must determine any new grantees' financial and technical capacity to carry out grant award before approval, and recipients are responsible for meeting all of FTA requirements and are subject to FTA's oversight process. So what that really means is, in reference to FTA requirements, that's applicable to Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It's applicable to the American with Disability Act of 1990, procurement practices as prescribed by the Federal Transit Administration, and also be subject to a triennial review that the FTA conducts through a third party to ensure that there is adherence to all of the different aspects relative to the guidelines that FTA outlines for any federal grant recipient. Moving forward to the next slide, please. So additionally, what's been on the horizon is the $1.2 trillion Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that was signed into law by President Biden on November 15th, just a couple of weeks ago. $107 billion for transit is included in the IIJA, with the majority of funding intended for asset maintenance and state of good repair expenditure. Discretionary grant availability for new projects such as bus rapid transit, as well as for bus and bus facilities and low, no emission programs. And for those that may not be familiar, we're talking about zero emission technology and leveraging that for vehicles that would help bring a reduction in carbon footprints to reality. Those programs have been increased in relationship to the funding that's been apportioned to them. Additionally, there's $102 billion that was included for passenger and freight rail over the next 5 years. The majority of the funding will support Amtrak's existing network with improvements. Additional discretionary grant funding is also available for new intercity passenger rail projects. And that said, the agency will pursue any and all federal funding of mutually beneficial partnerships that would expedite the completion of identified corridors. And then just to summarize really quickly in reference to RTD's intent, we must focus on utilizing recurring revenues, such as those from sales and use tax revenue for recurring expenditures. Moving forward to the next slide, please. So, whereas the strategic plan establishes the agency's strategic priorities between now and 2026, the initiatives I will now highlight help to inform how those strategic plans will be addressed. Next slide, please. So quite naturally, this group is certainly more than familiar with the Northwest Rail Peak Service Plan currently in development. So I will not belabor the topic today, but wanted to just provide a really succinct update on where we are. The solicitation for consultant services is now underway and proposals are currently under review. Formal work can commence following an award of a contract and a notice to proceed, which is anticipated in the first quarter of 2022. So simply put, we endeavor, the selection team that's evaluating the proposals will put forward a recommendation. That will be a staff recommendation presented to our board of directors for their consideration in the first quarter of 2022, which will enable us, upon their direction, to leverage a notice to proceed if that's the desire of the board of directors. Moving forward to the next slide, please. So another initiative which you all are familiar is Reimagine Rtd. It's a 2-year effort which basically is to evaluate and forecast the changing transportation needs of the region and involve customers and stakeholders in the conversation. The key to this effort will open, and it has, transparent dialogue about how to balance agency priorities with limited resources, and it's composed of 2 main elements. The system optimization plan, which aims to balance mobility needs and fiscal limitations, and then there's the mobility plan for the future, which is intended to identify strategies to address the region's future mobility needs between now and 2025. Next slide, please. So the system optimization plan, simply put, is currently underway, and we are anticipating to fully implement this upon doing extensive outreach and having discussion, and of course the board's action, have it implemented by 2027. And really and truly what we're trying to do is look at it in a way of optimizing our transportation network. The way we are doing service delivery currently, we have a 2,342 square mile service area. And in doing so, within that vast service area, we have disparate operating environments. Some are densely populated, some are more rural, some basically would command more frequent service, whereas others maybe not so much, but perhaps utilizing different mobility options to service the need, as opposed to a 60-foot articulated bus or a 40-foot bus. Perhaps it makes more sense to use on-demand microtransit. So really, as we look at where we are today, we're trying to reverse and mitigate the ridership loss trends, recognizing that here we are in a state, once again, where mask mandates have been put back into place by various counties. We have the Omicron variant, which we have yet to know what that actually means for us going forward. But one thing, hospitalizations are on the rise. So what we're really trying to do is stay flexible, agile, and nimble as we deduce what might be optimal as we go forward. Most transit agencies across the country leverage what we call holistically as a comprehensive operational assessment every 5 to 7 years or 7 to 10, contingent upon that transit entity's operating environment. And really what it's about is improving service performance and efficiency. Does it make sense for us to operate a bus route that runs 2.5 hours that may not be a good return on investment as we look at the revenue hours because there's only 3 boardings per hour? Perhaps it makes more sense to bifurcate those transit routes to assess where in fact people are getting on to ensure that there's greater service delivery during peak hours in which people need to utilize. One things we have learned in this short period of time in the midst of the past 6 to 9 months that people are leveraging public transit to get to varying activity centers for social engagements, i.e. going to sporting events, going out to dinner in the theater, because we have seen an uptick in ridership on the weekends. So that's what we mean by improving the service performing and efficiency. And then of course, ensure that we have fiscal sustainability, addressing the changing travel markets. Are people going to come back into the office? Really believe that a hybrid model may be here to stay. So as we customarily had looked at, we're only as good as the last rush hour being Monday through Friday, and really looking at those bookends being Monday and Friday, perhaps there'll be a greater surge, perhaps on a Wednesday when people are more inclined to come into a traditional office-like setting. And also we want to remain competitive in the sense of remain competitive with our service delivery model, remain competitive as it relates to our employees, because we can't just deliver the service in absentia of having people power. So all of those things come into play, and of course, improving our service quality. As we see on the bottom of this slide, steps 1 through 4, conducting the comprehensive assessment of services. That's what I've alluded to, reviewing existing travel patterns, financial capacity, and of course, discussing community and agency goals and values. And that's where you have that intersectionality with our strategic plan. The initial phases of this system optimization plan have now commenced in some fashion with the board's adoption of the January 22 service changes, because these certain elements were used to help inform decisions. And the next slide will speak to that more clearly. If we can advance to the next one, please. So back in April of this year, the board of directors adopted these 6 guiding principles. And these guiding principles are being used as the foundation upon which service delivery decisions are being made. And let's make no mistake that there is a clear-cut nexus with our strategic plan as we talk about those 4 strategic priorities, i.e. customer, community value, customer excellence, employee ownership, and then rounding out with financial success. So on this slide before you, you can see mobility, and really what that's about is the service we're providing, making everyday lives better by enhancing access to activity centers and opportunities. And then equity. We have to ensure that we're looking through an equity lens when we make decisions about service delivery. Is there equitable access for our vast and diverse customer segments throughout the service area? And then quite naturally, financial. Are resources being optimized and efficiencies maximized for the betterment of service delivery? And then partnerships. That is key. Recognizing the disparate service area that I outlined when we were speaking on the previous slide, it's welcoming the opportunity to partner with stakeholders and invite them to share ideas on how RTD can enhance mobility throughout the region. I will say that we were trekking down this path in sort of a hodgepodge way. What we are envisioning doing is ensuring, as relates to partnerships, that everybody knows the rules of engagement, so it doesn't appear as if RTD is providing preferential treatment to community Y while community Z is over here and community A doesn't know what's happening. We are endeavoring to ensure that everybody has an understanding and looking at perhaps doing a call for partnerships in such a way where everybody clearly has the same opportunity. Now, the one thing about partnerships, it doesn't absolve us from ensuring that there's the financial mechanisms in place and that we're being equitable in our service delivery and mobility. So all of these things are all encompassing as we go forward with this. And we welcome the opportunity to share those ideas and enhance the mobility throughout the region as a whole. Rounding out with workforce. We all know we're in the midst of the Great Resignation. The whole world seems to be short-staffed, but recognizing that our agency, with it being a service delivery agency, is labor intensive. We are an agency made up of people who move people, and they have innovative ideas. So recognizing employees have boots on the ground and know what's working well, we're not just going to limit it to doing some route modeling with a computer-based program to discern what might be optimal. We need to ensure, okay, is there enough running time as we have this bus running on a specific route? Perhaps there's more time needed because we're picking up people with mobility devices that may need some extra time to navigate the boarding and alighting of a vehicle. And so it's important that we, being myself as well as members of my team, know what's working well and where there's an opportunity. It's imperative that I, as well as my teammates, lean in and listen when our employees basically bring forward ideas, because oftentimes the best ideas come from those that are on the front line. And then rounding out with sustainability, reducing greenhouse gases are paramount as we work to sustain planet Earth, as we've described in our community value strategic priority. So these considerations relative to the guiding principles are imperative to position the agency so the transit agency can deliver service in an intentional fashion. Moving forward to the next slide. So rounding out, as relates to my listening sessions that I took part in last year and that I still currently take part in, is recognizing that our fare structure is overly cumbersome and confusing, and not to mention expensive. Moreover, I also learned, and I know all of you are aware, that we have leveraged several promotional fare programs, leveraged to introduce services and to incentivize people to utilize RTD services. But recognizing within the parameters of the Federal Transit Administration guidelines, those are only for 6 months, and a fair equity analysis must be conducted. We've recognized that this has caused some angst, not only for us internally, but externally, and it's important that we understand our customers' pain points and empathize to those through a human-centric lens. So with that, what we're embarking upon is this fair study and equity analysis, as I mentioned, and needless to say that this is going to basically help address, I believe, some of the high level of frustration that all of us have endured for quite some time. And so looking at the timeline before you, I'd like to share that we are kicking off the fair study. We were doing a lot of fact-based gathering by engaging with a multitude of different audiences in the summer months. Just recently, we took a recommendation before the board as relates to identifying a consultancy that will leverage this endeavor. And that brings us sort of in the middle of the slide to January 2022, where we're going to kick off this program. And this fair study and equity analysis is really the first of its kind for the agency, as it will include extensive multicultural outreach, leveraging culturally specific community organizations, servicing the BIPOC communities, which represents Black, Indigenous, and people of color, youth, senior, people with disabilities, individuals experiencing homelessness, veterans, and the LGBTQ+ community, as well as a multitude of approaches in reference to our tactics to ensure that we really laser in on what it is that we can do best to optimize our fare structure. And this equitable fare structure, we hope to arrive at and past program recommendations are anticipated to be established in late 2022. Moving forward to the next slide. So lastly, I will touch upon Spare the Air Days. You all may have heard some conversation about this. This is something that I have not created in a vacuum. This is not some novel concept, but it's actually one that has been employed in great effect in California since 1991 and elsewhere throughout the country. And according to data from the Conservation Colorado, vehicle emissions are tied with electric power generation as the single largest source of emissions in the state, and are a major contributing factor to air pollution levels in the state. So Spare the Air Days are events for which transit agencies, transit across the RTD system, I should qualify it as, would be complimentary once a certain air quality index threshold is surpassed. And this incentive is intended to encourage motorists, particularly those of single occupant vehicles, to hang up their car keys for the day and let RTD do the driving. And perhaps just maybe those new or former customers will enjoy the comfort and convenience of public transit so much that they form new commuting habits. So my team internally has been shoring up our plans as it relates to this. Quite naturally, as you can see on the slide before you, partnerships are imperative as we look at the state of Colorado, the Regional Council of Governments, the Air Quality Control Council, especially TMOs and TMAs, because basically we want this to not be a burden on customers. And from my experience, having been part of Spare the Air Days and Spare the Fare, it's second nature in the sense when air quality index exceeds a certain threshold, be that 100 or another number that we collectively arrive on. It's basically when you look at your phone and you know where that air quality index number is, you automatically know that public transit is complimentary that day. So going forward to the next slide, that concludes my presentation. I thank you for your attention and invite any questions if time allows, but I'll yield the floor to Commuting Solutions. So thank you very kindly.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson and Director Geisinger. We appreciate you joining us here today. Julie Pillar with Sister Carmen Community Center says in the chat, I applaud this important fair study and equity analysis and love the Spare the Air Days. Thank you so much. If you do have questions for either Ms. Johnson or Director Geisinger, please do add them to the chat. We have about 5 minutes to field those questions. Malcolm Fleming, who is the town manager for Erie, has added a question or comment here, so I will read it. I believe you personally embody RTD's values. However, RTD's strategic priority of financial success requires more than just being a good steward of taxpayer dollars. RTD needs additional funding. Unfortunately, RTD's past failure to deliver on Fast Track's commitments makes Northwest Rail communities skeptical of any attempt to increase funding to RTD from our region or corridor. How will you overcome this challenge, rebuild trust, and secure the financial resources to deliver Northwest Rail more than just peak service? And will RTD use federal IIJA funding to complete Northwest Rail?
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you so kindly for the question and your comments. Recognizing that there's a lot of history here and I'm coming into the organization, all I can do is look out of the front windshield and create an intentional culture. The intent behind the strategic plan is to be as transparent as possible. That's why it's imperative that we do have a scorecard, that we are engaging and showcasing what it is that we are doing with monies that are made available to us for the betterment of the transportation network as a whole throughout the 2,342 square mile area. As relates to the IIJA, as qualified, those funds are specific to a myriad of different elements, and we're awaiting guidance from FTA about what those may be. One thing I will say as relates to Northwest Rail, there could be opportunities to leverage monies that are available through partnerships as we look at Front Range Passenger Rail, as we look at the Southwest Chief as relates to Amtrak. But in and of itself, with the Northwest Rail corridor being eligible for federal funding, relative to where we are currently, we're trying to get a common set of facts because as relates to new rail starts as prescribed under the Federal Transit Administration, that rail corridor does not garner the appropriate ridership to be competitive to secure a full funding grant agreement with the Federal Transit Administration. As it relates to what RTD's intent is with the IIJA, we will basically be looking to leverage discretionary grant opportunities as it relates to bus and bus facilities, bus rapid transit in partnership with individual entities within the region, and more so as we look at the low no emissions bus program as we look at our sub fleet, recognizing that we are on the horizon of having a sub fleet of battery electric buses with 17 buses on order right now to round that out to 52. We need to invest in our state of good repair. RTD has a backlog of asset management that has not been managed in 2 in the amount of $290 million. So it's very analogous to this. It's like we're sitting here in a house, we have an unsettled foundation, a dilapidated roof, and a plumbing problem. Before we can start thinking about adding on an additional room, we need to ensure that our core dwelling is in a state of good repair. And that's where our laser focus will be, because over the past couple of years, we basically have delayed investing in our assets. And while we talk about being in a position to perhaps enhance our transportation network, it would be for naught if we don't have the core structure. If we don't have buses and we don't have rail cars to deploy out onto the main line, it'll be for naught relative to having adequate resources abound to ensure that we can deliver on the intent of the agency's creation.
Thank you. There's one more question in the chat, and then we'll move on to allow time for the rest of our speakers. And it's for you, Director Johnson. It says, with the federal funds that are now available in our current pandemic situation, is it possible to end the fare study and simply go fare free now? So there's the question.
Oh, thank you very much, Director Barros. Actually, we're not able to do that. Being a recipient of federal dollars, specifically as it related to your question, we have to adhere to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Regardless if we wanted to make it fare free for all, we still have to do our due diligence in relationship to that, because what would that decision be predicated upon? So we have to ensure going forward holistically, what might that mean, and recognizing the monies that have been put forward through federal relief. It's been identified that is for transit operations, and fare revenue, i.e. operative word there is revenue. And so basically we'd have to look back to see what would subsidize the overarching aspect we were able to incur from the fare box. So thank you for the question, and thank you very much for the opportunity to address those, Executive Director Barros.
Oh, you're welcome. And thank you both for joining us here today. And we wish you a wonderful holiday season. Thank you. All right, well, moving right along then, as part of the Northwest Area Mobility Study, or NAMS as we call it, which was a consensus study RTD led in partnership with the Northwest region in 2014. And the study identified short, near, and long-term regional transit priorities. US 287 between Longmont and Broomfield and ultimately Denver was identified as a high priority corridor with strong ridership potential. Since then, Boulder County has taken the lead to implement a first phase bus rapid transit study in partnership with the city of Longmont, the town of Erie, the city of Lafayette, and the city and county of Broomfield. In addition, coalition work has begun to engage local governments north of Longmont, including Fort Collins, Berthoud, and Loveland. And we're pleased to have Kathleen Brackey and Jeff Butts with Boulder County staff to provide an overview of this important first phase of work, which is just wrapping up. So welcome, Kathleen and Jeff.
Great, thank you so much, Audrey, and to everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today with Jeff and to be able to share an update with you all on the US 287 Bus Rapid Transit Phase 1 study. If we could go to the next slide, please, and the next slide. Great, as Audrey mentioned, this project is certainly a testament to the partnership and the teamwork of all of the communities along the US 287 corridor, from the city and county of Broomfield north through Boulder County, and continuing up north along 287 to Loveland and Fort Collins and Berthoud. So it's really been a great opportunity to look at not only local but regional and inter-regional transit needs and opportunities along the corridor, and to build upon the longstanding partnerships with all of us in the Northwest region. I also want to do a special shout out to Sarah Grant and the City and County of Broomfield for their partnership with us in Boulder County to help co-fund this study. And we're very excited to be at this important milestone. Next slide, please. And again, when we talk about these corridors, and as Audrey mentioned, the context being the Northwest Area Mobility Study, or NAMS, that was created together many years ago, it's really about why US 287. And we all know that even in the time of coming through the pandemic, our traffic congestion is increasing. our air quality is continuing to suffer, and the environmental and economic and social impacts of that are just not sustainable. And we need to find new ways and new opportunities to move people and connect people to opportunities along the corridor as well as throughout the region. And when we think about this corridor today, certainly we want to plan for the transportation needs of all of the people living and working along the corridor and going to school, but we also want to look out into the future. And we know that the communities along US 287 are experiencing rapid growth and change, and we want to be able to tailor the future of transit along the corridor and mobility solutions to address the needs both of today and into the future. Next slide, please. And again, when we think about US 287, I think for me this visual is helpful because it shows the north-south spine of US 287, the orange line there, again, connecting from US 36 on the south through Broomfield and north through Boulder County and beyond. It becomes the spine of the Northwest Area Mobility Bus Rapid Transit Corridor. So we think about what's connecting people or what's creating that network of mobility and helping people get from where they live to everywhere they want to go and connecting people to each other and their destinations. So the US 287 corridor really is that critical link and will help amplify the benefits of the east-west corridors such as 119 and Colorado 7 and US 36. So we're looking at it in that context in and of itself as a corridor, but certainly the important role that US 287 plays in connecting all of these important corridors throughout our region. Next slide, please. And when we look at the corridor planning for US 287, again, it's not in isolation. It's looking at the work and the plans for each of the communities along the corridor, for Boulder County, for Longmont, for Broomfield, and again, that connection with the east-west corridor planning as well, so that we're creating an integrated system that gives people mobility and options and choice to move around our region and to connect beyond our region to the metro area as well as to northern Colorado. Next slide, please. Great, thank you. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Jeff Butts, who is with Boulder County's Transportation Planning Team and is our project manager for US 287. So Jeff, take it away.
Great, thank you, Kathleen, for that overview. And again, thank you to all the partners. I'm going to quickly discuss the results of our feasibility study. Next slide, please. And so you can see here that there are two different portions to the study. We have the core area between Longmont and Broomfield, which is gold. And then we have service connections to Fort Collins and to Denver. Next slide, please. Here's where we're at in the study. We are just wrapping it up. We actually just had a public meeting last week, so the bar is a little bit to the right, and then we'll be moving into phase 2, which I'll talk about here. Next slide, please. This is being created through partnership in multiple different ways with folks. We have our technical side of teams. We have our public that we're looking at. We're working very closely with the public. And then we also have the elected officials and the coalition building that Audrey is working on with Commuting Solutions. So thank you, Audrey, for that. Next slide, please. Here you can see some themes that have come up. On the left-hand side, you see the themes that came up from our first technical team meeting. On the right-hand side are themes from the community conversations that we had. And you can see the themes of safety, connectivity, bicycling come up to the top here. And that has really led into the phase 2 study. And you can see overlap and things to focus on. So next slide, please. And so now we'll go into the BRT feasibility analysis. Next slide, please. The consultants have looked at 3 different patterns in their analysis. They came up with these 3 different routes to look at. There's a long route from Fort Collins to Denver. There is the medium route from Longmont to Broomfield, and then there is the short route from Lafayette to Broomfield. You look at the right, you can see a map with the stops on here, and in the table itself, there are different times. And if you are going to take the bus, it's going to be somewhere between 30 minutes, 15, 10, and 7.5 minutes in what they modeled. Next slide, please. We came down to 3 different modeling scenarios. One of them was operational improvements only that could be done with limited capital investment. And then we have the stations investment and some branding and BRT mode is what the consultants call it, and intersections. So the bus can get through the intersections faster. And then we have another scenario of capital investment that also includes the turning lanes. So they build on each other, but then also turn the turning lanes into something that the bus could use as well. There is still a center running option on the table that would come at the bequest of local communities, however. Next slide, please. Here are the results of the models. We can see on the left-hand side is the AM, the right-hand side is the PM, and then you have southbound on the left, right, or northbound on the right. And you start at the baseline and you go to operational. We increase the efficiency of the bus and increase the competitiveness with the car by about 20 minutes. And then we start making investments. It's another 10 to 20 minutes saved, and then move forward. And more you invest, the more you get back. And so the less time people have to take on the bus. Next slide, please. This shows the overall ridership. When we go to the operational improvements in this scenario, we're about 4,000 riders, just under that. We start getting capital investments and we get over 5,000 riders in both scenarios. Next slide, please. And then this shows the operational funds that would need to be expended here. We're looking at about $19 to $21 million. The major, which is on par with the other NAMS corridors, the major theme here is as you make one-time capital investments, you decrease the overall need for funding continually. And so that's a big thing to look at here. Fewer buses and fewer drivers. Next slide, please. These are the capital estimates at this time. They will be refined. So the intersections only, as well as stations, we're looking at about 180 to 200 million. When we get into that, plus the turning lanes for buses, then that is up to about 215 to 230 million. Next slide, please. And as mentioned, the air quality is important. This will change behavior, increase transit ridership, decrease the automobile vehicle miles traveled, but increase bus vehicle miles traveled. And so we'll need to look at low or no emission vehicles to further increase the air benefits, air quality benefits. Next slide, please. An early action item that you can take is the stations area toolkit, which is available at bolco.org/287 planning. If you're working with developers or you want some inspiration, know sort of some ideas, this is applicable to 287 and corridors elsewhere. Highly recommend taking a look at this. Has level boarding. It has ways to make the stations more comfortable. Next slide, please. And then going into next steps, the study's gonna be published, put on the website. It has some for review, and it also have some recommendations. Next slide, please. And the first recommendation is going to be that the implementation is a phased approach. We look at the different opportunities to meet multiple objectives and then incrementally have complementary projects that could fit into those buckets there. Next slide, please. Phase 2, as I mentioned, is going to go from Longmont to Broomfield, and looking at safety as our big thing. And thank you to our funding partners of DRCOG, Longmont, Erie, Lafayette, and City County of Broomfield, as well as Boulder County. Safety includes all users of the road. We'll be following a federal process to try and get the federal funding, and this phase is going to feed into that next phase. And then overall, the win-win, the projects that meet multiple objectives will come to the surface. And so that is the next slide, please. That's the end of the presentation. Please go to boco.org/287 planning, sign up for our listserv. You scroll down a little ways, there's a button right in the middle. Take a look at our stations area toolkit. My contact information is here, as is the consultants. So feel free to reach out with any questions that you may have. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Jeff and Kathleen. We appreciate you joining us here to provide an overview of your important work this year of 2021. I apologize. It looks like the elf on the shelf grabbed our slide deck overnight. That or Angela's 2-year-old son, who she's navigating the slides. So I apologize for the squiggly mark. I'm not sure how that added to the slides, but he can be devilish sometimes. So thank you for giving us a little bit of grace with that. So recognizing the importance of 287 just for interregional travel, we have the Flex service that's going already from Fort Collins to Boulder. Can you say a little bit about the broader travel opportunity to reach and serve communities beyond and further north of Longmont? Thank you.
Kathleen, I think I'll let you take this one.
Sure, no problem. Again, I think that's what's an exciting opportunity for US 287 and the BR bus rapid transit feasibility work that we're doing is how do we build off of the success of other types of interregional service that we've had great success with, and that includes the Flex Express that is operated by the City of Fort Collins Transport. That currently provides peak hour express service between Fort Collins, Loveland, Longmont, and Boulder. And again, it's operated through an interagency partnership, is co-funded by all of the communities along the corridor. Our hope would be that going forward, as Jeff mentioned, we're looking at a phased approach, that could be looking at opportunities for growing that type of interregional service to run north and south along 287 and continue south from Longmont all the way to Broomfield and US 36, and ideally all the way into Denver. So we want to build on those partnerships, those models that we have today, and then figure out how do we layer the services together, recognizing that there's not one magic solution to the travel markets along US 287. There's the need, as Jeff showed on the side, there's the need for short distance trips within the corridor, and there's the need for longer distance trips within the corridor and beyond to Denver and up to Fort Collins. So I'm excited about this, and I think that there's lots of opportunities to figure out how do we build on that success going forward, and certainly encourage and invite input and ideas from all of the members of Commuting Solutions and other community partners along the corridor.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this project and the corridor coalition opportunity, and just really appreciate Boulder County's leadership and partnership with City and County of Broomfield to provide the seed funding for this first phase, and look forward to advancing the study even further in 2022. So thank you for your leadership. We appreciate it.
Great, thank you. And I want to say it's a great partnership also with all of the corridor communities and RTD and CDOT. So it really is truly a team effort. So thanks, everyone.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey, for letting us present, and thank you to all of our partners and helping us with this plan.
Wonderful. Happy holidays.
Indeed.
All right, last but certainly not least, we are pleased to have with us Chris from the State Demographer's Office, who will provide a summary of the 2020 census results, which have been recently released over the last few months. Changes in employment, population, demographics, and commuting preferences provides valuable information to inform local and regional transportation planning, as well as representative information for congressional districts, the RTD board, and other representative bodies, which Director Geisinger mentioned earlier in our day. Please welcome Chris Ackers, who will provide a summary of key metrics for Colorado and specific to our region. So welcome, Chris.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
All right, perfect. I just wanted to make sure. I thank you very much for this opportunity, and great opportunity to follow up on the BRT guys. I'll mention just as a quick aside that probably about 8 years ago, I was in Bogota, Colombia, and they have one of the best BRT systems in the world with a center lane that the bus zooms down and everything too. So I'm excited for some of the potential that we see, that can be realized in 287 and seeing that implemented here in northwest region of the metro area. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump right into my presentation, please. There's been a handful of trends that we'll see on the next slide that basically have been dominating Colorado for the past decade. And, one of those is that our population growth has been slowing a little bit. Part of this is due to a slowing natural increase. We are seeing fewer births and more deaths. Of course, this was really higher due to COVID last year, but it has been increasing as our population has been aging there as well. Migration and mobility, in this case, mobility, we mean mobility in moving in between regions or moving in between counties, has been slowing. And that makes it harder for us to attract new migrants. If less of our growth is coming from that natural increase, births minus deaths, we need to attract more migrants to our area. And, that is more difficult because our growth has been concentrated in the Front Range, driving up prices here, increasing congestion on our roadways and the like there as well. Aging is something that our office has talked a lot about right there. And, it does have a large impact on transportation, both in the form of the usage and people who might be growing older might be more dependent upon public transportation as they, maybe might not be as comfortable driving. And then also when we look at the age of a lot of our public transportation drivers, they tend to be the highest median age of all occupations. Overall, nationally, it's about 42.3 is the median age. But when we look at our transit drivers, they are at least a decade older than that and sometimes more. And then lastly, I won't touch on this very much throughout the course of the presentation, but I think it's very important to mention is we are seeing a great increase in our racial and ethnic diversity throughout our state. We'll learn a lot more about that as, more census results are released. But right now we're about 22% Hispanic in our state, and that is the sixth most diverse in terms of Hispanic or Latino population throughout the U.S. there. If we go to our next slide, I'll give you a couple highlights real quickly of the census. The 2020 census is done as part of Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution, mandated that is done every 10 years, started in 1790. And so we just recently got the results from the 2020 count. Typically, they would be delivered at the end of the year by the 31st of December, but COVID threw a wrinkle into transit plans and threw a wrinkle into the census plans as well. So this data did not come out until April, and it's still being phased and released as well. But we do know the U.S. population is just over 330 million. That's an increase of almost 23 million from 2010, or 7.4%. This is the second slowest growth on record of all those censuses that we've taken since 1790. You have to go back to 1920, to find a slower growth rate there overall, and that was impacted by the Spanish flu of 1918. In Colorado, we have about 5.75 million people, we can call it. That's an increase of just under 750,000 from 2010. And our growth rate of 14.8 is exactly double that of the nation's. That 14.8% growth change was sixth fastest overall and ninth in numeric. So there were 8 other states that added more than 744,000. One of the biggest things, this piece of news that we got from this, is that Colorado gained an 8th congressional seat. So a lot of news recently about redrawing those congressional district maps and the like. And then a lot of this census data is going to be used to redraw a lot of other districts, anything from county commissioners to city councils, maybe even some RTD commissioners there as well. Something significant about this increase, if we look at it, that's different from years past, is that the 18 plus population increased by over 700,000, or 18.1%. if we look at that, that is faster growth than our overall population. The under 18 population grew by less than 40,000 or 3.1%. So one thing that's unique about this population increase is that it largely occurred in older adults. That means that most of these, that 744,000 that we added, most of them, 700,000 or so of them, were of working and driving age. If we go to the next slide, I'll break it down a little bit more on how it looks across our region. And I did mention the concentrated growth at the beginning of the presentation. That is best highlighted in this slide by the red. Those are areas that added more than 50,000 people since 2010, kind of starts up in that Fort Collins area, Larimer, Weld, and runs all the way down along the I-24 corridor to El Paso County. So if we think about that 744,000, about 93% of that increase occurred on the Front Range. Something that made it even more concentrated is if we look around the periphery of our state, there are a lot of areas that are in blue. The San Luis Valley, the Lower Arkansas Valley, Eastern Plains, and even Northwest Colorado, where they're very dependent on coal. We've also seen a decline in population. So that just kind of shows that that growth has really been concentrated on the I-70 and I-25 corridors especially. If we go to the next slide, I kind of put these numbers that we saw in a thematic map into a bar chart here. So this chart looks at all 64 counties in Colorado and the growth that they experienced from 2010 to 2020. Denver had the most, and followed by El Paso County. That's that I-25 corridor kind of theme that we see, Arapahoe, Adams, Weld, and then we get into Larimer, Jefferson, Boulder, and Broomfield. Something unique, if we just look at these bottom three that kind of embodies this area, is that we see Broomfield with its nearly 33% growth rate, 2.5 times faster than the state, kind of leading all metro areas and the fastest growth there overall. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we see Jefferson County, which is a much older county and much more established, with some growth limits that we see now in Lakewood and the like there too. So not quite as fast a growth in Jefferson County. So a little bit of a dichotomy there in this Northwest region that I wanted to point out from these slides. And it does show you all the gains that we had. And then in the right-hand column are the 10 of the 16 counties that did lose population. The losses were fairly small overall. Kit Carson stands out on I-70. They lost a prison, and that's one of the reasons why they had such a large loss, bigger than everyone else. Similar thing in Bent as well. If we go to the next slide, please, what we see here is the age distribution of Colorado. I put a black line right there at age 65. The baby boomers are shown in purple in this line. The oldest of the boomers this year are turning 70, but the youngest of the boomers are still in their 50s. So it kind of mentioned that, median age of that transportation driver, that's right there where the baby boomers and Gen X's kind of converge at about age 56. But if we look at all of those baby boomers that are in the late 50s or early 60s, a lot of them will soon be, leaving the workforce and, becoming a little bit more unpredictable in how their travel patterns are going. So right now, our 65 plus population is about 800,000. That would be to the right of that black line. We expect it to grow to nearly 1.2 million by 2030. So a lot of growth in the older adults in Colorado, the fastest growing segment of our society, if you will. If we go to the next slide, what you'll see here is who moves to Colorado. If you're ever at a cocktail party and someone says Colorado gets 20,000 people a month moving here, well, that is partially correct. On our in-migration side, we have about 240,000 people moving here every year, but we're not building 100,000 housing units for them to move into. So we have out-migration that ranges between about 180,000 and 200,000 each year. The first column shows you the biggest donator states. That's Texas, California, Florida, Arizona. Why is this significant? If we think about those are places that are all fairly heavily car dependent. And that means that people who are moving here from those areas probably aren't as accustomed to taking transit. And we typically see, according to a study that I saw from the Downtown Denver Partnership, that people are most likely to use the same mode of transportation that they've used in their prior place where they lived in the new place that they moved to, at least initially, until they get a little bit more comfortable or until the traffic gets so bad that it causes them to look for alternatives. Lastly, I'll just mention that the net column, where California is the leader, followed by Texas with both about 15,000 that they contribute, is what's also shown on the map. So these are states that give us the ins, less the outs, and that is the net. So California, Texas, and Illinois are biggest net contributors. If we go to the next slide, what we see here is some of the early 2020 one-year experimental data for Colorado. And this is from the American Community Survey. This is some of my favorite information that I have to look at every year there overall. And, there's a couple significant things that I want to point out. The first thing that you see is there's really not that much difference between Colorado and the United States between those numbers who drove alone in a single occupancy vehicle overall. It's right about 2/3. Same thing with carpool, right about 7-8% of the population. Public transit, we took a little bit more of a hit in Colorado. This was mostly due to the pandemic and a large fall off that we saw here. Where did the shift occur when we saw that drop in public transit and a little bit of the drop in those that are bicycling or walking? It was in that work from home. So we see Colorado especially had a large share of work from home, and even in the United States, COVID caused that behavior to change. One of the things Director Johnson mentioned was kind of that hybrid schedule that people are going on to, where there's going to be a bit of working from home 2-3 days a week and 2-3 days going back into the office. Now, I think one of the key things that RTD and that transit can leverage is kind of, taking that 21% when it falls in Colorado and trying to get those people shifted back into that public transit, recapturing some riders and adding new ones. And then, not having them go back into that single occupancy top line vehicle right there. As we go to the next slide, we kind of see the implications of a lot of those trips done in single occupancy vehicles. The most common, more than half of all individuals have a commute that lasts between 10 and 29 minutes. There are some on the bottom that are those super commutes that are, 8 to 7% that are 60 minutes or longer. But really, I think that kind of, that 10 to 29 minute is really a great opportunity of, where you can get people from driving themselves to maybe taking transit, especially if there's some of those time-saving things that were mentioned in the previous presentation, where it can make the riding transit kind of comparable to the time that it makes from traveling in a single occupancy vehicle or in a car. And unfortunately, this data from the ACS is only available at the statewide level and on an experimental basis due to a lot of collection problems that were presented by the pandemic and the inability to collect a lot of data in person. If we go to the next slide, though, I'll share with you a little bit of data from a program called On the Map. I have the link to it in the bottom of this. This is really quite a fascinating kind of program. What it does is takes where people live in their wage records from what they earn and matches it with census data records. What I'm showing here is where all the residents are, all the people who work in Boulder County live. So there's about 184,000 people who work in Boulder County, and the majority of them live somewhere besides Boulder County. I kind of highlighted, one thing that's unique on this at the bottom of the right table, in that there is a greater share of people that are spending 30 to 59 minutes. I think that's somewhat reflective of the fact that Boulder has very high wages that it pays, but it also has high housing prices. So people are very attracted to the potential of a job in Boulder, but it's not often easy to realize a close location to it. So if we look at the right-hand column on the table there, it shows all the counties where workers live. So it goes through Weld, Adams, Jefferson, Denver, Larimer, which kind of helps to explain why that flex service is so important there as well. And then Broomfield, Arapahoe, even El Paso County, very far reaching, and then a lot of other counties as well. If we go to the next slide, I break this down just a little bit more and draw your attention to the bottom right hand first, to the bottom column. So there are nearly 100,000 people that come into Boulder every day to commute. There's about 85,000 people that both live and work in Boulder. Some of those might have the 10-minute or less commute that they might even be able to walk or bike or, fairly easy. And then there's another 60 plus thousand who are leaving Boulder every day, so that kind of just shows you how those numbers break out if you look at the bottom left table that I put together there. Now, Broomfield is a little bit remarkable here. If we look at Broomfield, they have almost an equal number of persons commuting in and out, in about 30,000, 35,000 or so there. But when we look at the number that both live and work in Broomfield, it's less than 5,000. So 1 out of 8 workers both live and work in Broomfield, but but 7 out of 8 workers or residents from Broomfield have to travel outside of the county to work. Now, the county is highlighted there. You can see it's a very small county, smallest geographically in Colorado, but also the second highest kind of density, persons per square mile, behind Denver only, which is something that favors transit from Broomfield as well. If we go to the next slide, please. What we'll see is a little bit of a highlight on Jefferson County. And the Jefferson County residents really work, all over the county. One of the things that is a thing to highlight, and I mentioned a little bit slower growth as Jefferson's been more established, is that Jefferson is a little bit of a bedroom community where, you have 200,000 plus workers who live in Jefferson. Many of them just commute over to Denver or Adams or Arapahoe, some to Douglas, a lot even going to El Paso County, and then even a connection up north to Weld and Fort Collins there as well. So, a little bit more unique in Jefferson, that it's more established with housing and not as much business. So a little bit more of an outflow of commute from Jefferson than into Jefferson there as well. If we go to the next slide, please. One of the things we'll see is our projections for employment growth over these next 5 years. We are expecting Colorado to experience very robust employment growth, but most of it's going to be concentrated here along the I-25 corridor. Weld will probably have some of the fastest growth in this region. A lot of that is related to construction of houses that are being built there, as well as, the price point that they have for some of those houses. But up and down the I-25 corridor, we're expecting a lot of growth there as well. Still some areas in blue that are going to decline, but that means that might just be more attractive for people from those outer line areas to migrate into the metro area where opportunities are greater. If we go to the next slide, we'll quickly see kind of where we think our population is going to be over the next 3 decades. Again, I mentioned we're just at about 5.8 million now. We expect it to grow to about 7.5 million over the future. Most of this growth, 1.6 million of it, is going to occur on the Front Range. We have El Paso County growing very rapidly, Denver, Weld, Larimer, a lot of the same places that have seen a lot of the recent growth. But one of the unfortunate things is that people cannot always live close to where they work. As I mentioned with Boulder, people are attracted to places where they earn higher wages. Typically, that's Denver, Arapahoe, Douglas, and Boulder counties. But those are also some of the more expensive counties for our people to live in. So we see cheaper housing in Adams, in Weld County, in Jefferson to a certain degree too. But what that means is often that people are forced to travel further distances to get to where they need to be for their place of work to their home residence right there, which makes the importance of what we were talking about earlier in that kind of, intermodal and intercity and rapid connections of those areas there to help make transit a viable part of a commuting solution that we're looking at there as well. If we go to the next slide, please, it just kind of summarizes some of the risks that we have, both to the employment forecast and the population forecast. First and foremost, as Director Johnson mentioned, has to be the pandemic uncertainty, where we are now with Omicron, how the vaccine uptake is going to continue as well, too. International immigration has been really depressed for the past, I'd say, 8 to 8 years, more so even over the past 4. How we respond to that, part of the pandemic has closed our consulates and embassies, allowing us to process fewer visas and the like there too. That we are seeing an uptick in that. How sustained that is and how much it rebounds is really going to be important to our future flow of workers as well. Housing is of utmost importance. I mentioned some of the disconnect between where the best, highest paying jobs are and where the more affordable housing is, which makes people having to commute further. Water is always of utmost importance in Colorado. There's a saying that goes around Colorado that, whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting for. So it shows you the importance of water. I already mentioned a little bit on aging. And I think the infrastructure transportation, as was mentioned earlier through the ARPA and the IIJA, lots of investment for transit that can be leveraged and causing a lot of, hopefully easier commutes that might attract people here as well. Lastly, there's a lot of different questions about state budget, tax policy, and industry changes that can occur too. Some boom and bust cycles that we've seen in the past that Colorado is very familiar with. So, I don't want to harbor on any of these risks at all, but you know, I do want to mention that they all are important to address, because if any of these risks are weighted to the downside, it could impact our ability to attract and retain those migrants that we need for our future workforce and for our future growth. So that's about all I have. I've got my contact information on the next slide. I know we've got a couple minutes for questions left. I probably won't have an opportunity to get to all of them, but I welcome you to drop me an email or give me a call. Visit our website, please, to pick up a little bit more of this information.
Thank you, Chris. And yes, if somebody does have a quick question, we'll slide it in here. We have a couple minutes before we need to end our meeting today. You did a great job blazing through some very impressive and detailed information that's very relevant to regional transportation as well as locally. And I loved how you talked about whiskey and remarkable Brimfield all before 10:30 this morning. So great job. I'm not seeing any questions added to the chat. I appreciate that you have your contact info here. I'm sure folks will follow up with you offline and we can stay in touch with you, Chris. But I know you're a big advocate of transit, and we're a transit rider before the pandemic. So hopefully you'll be riding RTD again soon yourself. So thank you.
I was just, you know, cleaning up and got my kids my Denver cards, found those again. So, you know, looking forward to getting them on the buses and introducing them to ways to get downtown and other things there, as well as getting back into museums and other things with them. So, you know, it's one of those great opportunities that I think we have to leverage with a lot of, you know, new interest in transit and new dollars that are flowing into. So I'm really excited for the work that you guys are doing and the work that RTD is going to be doing, you know, over this next decade as well.
Thank you. We are too. So folks are asking if the slides are available online. This event is being recorded, so we will be posting it to our website, Kim, or I'm happy to send it to you directly. So thank you, Chris. Happy holidays.
Thank you.
All right, folks. Well, thanks again for joining us for our membership meeting. We're so grateful for the presenting sponsorship support of Boulder County, as well as our gold sponsors, the Colorado High Performance Transportation Enterprise, Elevations Credit Union, the Northwest Chamber Alliance, Google, and the RTD. We have, in terms of upcoming events and updates for you, today is Colorado Gives Day. And we do encourage you to be generous with your support of nonprofits participating in that event today, including Commuting Solutions. You can give easily at coloradogives.org. Our first event for 2022 will be the legislative breakfast taking place on January 6th. We are hosting that event virtually due to the uncertainty related to the pandemic. So please do register and join us. We'll be now announcing our program for that in the next week or so. And then always stay in touch with us via our monthly newsletter, Up to Speed. So on behalf of our board of directors and team, we do wish you a joyous holiday season. We have very much to be grateful for related to transportation this year, and look forward to more abundance in the year ahead. So take care. Bye-bye.